Hi everyone, this is a follow-up to last week's video on money issues. And hopefully some of what I talk about today, some of you can identify with. Maybe if it's not happened to you, maybe it's happened to people close to you. I view my money mistakes as probably one of the largest mistakes of my life. The money thing, though, has been there my whole life. I mean, since I was probably late teens. And I shared some of the beginning parts of that with you last week. And I'm going to share with you today now two of the biggest mistakes I ever made with money. And I don't mean single events here. This is general mistakes I made with money. And I have so much regret around it. The only reason I'm even able to do this video today is because I have really moved past this kind of thing. I mean, I still have money problems, but the money problems I have right now are mostly caused by the fact that I live on low income. And so it's really hard to navigate low, when you don't make a lot of money to try to make sure that you're meeting your needs. So it's a different kind of problem now. And the only reason I'm able to talk about these two things is because they're things that I had to learn from and move past in my life and be able to, change the direction, be able to make a chore and be able to make a course correction, even though it came relatively late in my life. So I'm not happy about sharing this, but I do it because in the hopes that maybe it'll help somebody out there. It is very difficult to share this information with you today, just as it was difficult to do last week's video, and there's been several other videos that have been tough to do. But it's my choice to do it. I had someone comment, and I deleted their comment on my last video about how it was vulgar to talk about money and personal issues. No, that's my choice to do. If I want to do that, I can do that. You don't have to watch it. You don't have to listen. And for those of you who don't want to hear anything more about money stuff, then don't listen. Don't watch. So the thing is, the first thing I'm going to talk about is I think I was leaving off last week's video with talking about how I never really learned how to manage money and I became really a spendaholic. I've spent a lot throughout my 20s and 30s, which I know a lot of people do. And so it's not, a huge thing. But I made a huge mistake in my late 30s. And this is one of the two big ones. I actually went back to graduate school to get the first of two master's degrees I got. Now, I don't regret getting the degrees. I don't regret the education. I think it was valuable. I really enjoyed the process. I love having the degrees and it helped me teach and also work as a therapist. So I don't regret that. But what I do regret is at the time I was in a long-term relationship with a guy, and he had a good job at the time. And when I was in graduate school, I actually was working as a medical transcriptionist and really had my own business. I actually did it out of my home. And so I was working as well, but he was making, a lot more than I was. And so when it came time to take out student loans, which I needed to do at least to some degree when I was in graduate school, he said, "Oh, don't worry about that. When you get your degree or whatever, and when you have to pay them back, I'll help you pay them back." And I know he meant it. I mean, he was a good person. He was always very kind to me and generous to me. And, I had no reason not to believe him. And so we were together between about 1990, late 1990 and all in 2002. And so when I got my first degree, I graduated in 1997, and within 2 years, I actually decided to go back to school and get a counseling degree because I realized after I got my first degree in anthropology, it was very difficult to find a job in that field. And so, just out of practicality, I really thought, well, and I went to two state schools, I might say, I went to two state schools when I got my degrees. So I did not go to like the most expensive places or anything like that. But I took out the maximum amount of loan that they offered me. And that's because my, partner at the time, he said, "Don't worry about it." Well, in retrospect, it was a huge mistake to do that. I should have taken out half the loans that I did. And I know that now. So the thing is when I got my second degree and I graduated in 2001, we were still together. And again, he had said to me when I got the second degree, don't worry about it. I make plenty. I'll help you pay them back. No, and I know, like I said, I know at the time he meant it. But things were gradually breaking apart in that relationship, and it ended in the summer of 2002. And then I was left with giant student loans. And I was working as a bereavement counselor at the time, but I wasn't making a huge amount of money. And in fact, I couldn't afford the minimum monthly payment that they were requiring at that time. I couldn't make it. So I had to go into what I called years of deferment. And I did that. I didn't ever default on my main loans. There was one Perkins loan of $2,000 that I did eventually default on, but now that has been rolled into my other loans. But anyway, I ended up between 2 degrees getting about $60,000 in debt with student loans. Now, if I had been able to pay those back within 10 years even, that would have been great. And if I had still been with this ex of mine, I probably would have been able to pay them back in 10 years. But that's not what happened. So I was left making a fairly low salary. But when you defer, interest still accrues. So it just kept growing and growing and growing. And of course, the ability to even make any payments, because the minimum payment was well over $400 even at the beginning. So I went into this, deferment spiral and forbearance. And because then I started teaching at a community college, I was able to take classes for free. And that allowed me to have in-school deferments. I mean, I did everything I could to not go into default because that would have been horrible too. So I'm not proud of any of this. Believe me, it's horrible to try to explain this. Well, anyway, this is just the first mistake I made. So the first mistake I made led to the second mistake. What happened is, as I was freaking out over the end of the relationship, which also just put me into a, death spiral, and I had these student loans hanging over my head, I lost my mind for a while. I did. I mean, not technically crazy or anything, but I lost my good sense. And actually, what happened is I succumbed to gambling. Now, I've mentioned this before on my channel. It led to a number of years that I call the wasteland in my life. And if you ask the reason why I gambled, logically, it made no sense. I mean, now from the distance of time, it made no sense. But I think in my mind, I was desperate, and I was thinking, well, maybe if I gambled, I could win enough to pay my student loans. I honestly think that was a big part. The problem is, once I started I went to one particular casino in the Phoenix area, and I basically started, I lost control, because that's what happens. The whole setting, the machines, everything else are designed to hook you. I mean, that's the whole premise of the gambling industry. And so I did get hooked. And it was insane because I was never going to win. I actually did win. I was fairly lucky sometimes. And I won some big jackpots, but certainly not big enough to pay off my student loans. So the thing is that I was really spiraling downward, even more so. And this was the second big mistake of my life, that I allowed myself to get hooked on something like that, which was not going to save me. It was not going to take care of that debt. But I think it was there were multiple reasons why I fell into the gambling trap. And I think one of them was the threat of the student loans hanging over my head. But I also think it was just the despair I felt when that relationship ended and I was alone for so many years. I think that, and it took me a long time to make peace with being alone in life, which I eventually did. But in that time, I think the gambling served a couple of purposes. It gave me this illusion that I could somehow make that money, which obviously was never going to happen. And the other thing was, it distracted me. It numbed me, just like someone drinks when they're in despair or they take drugs. It was the same phenomenon for me with gambling. And so it was just a self-perpetuating destruction. It really was. I mean, I'm amazed. When I look back at it now, I'm amazed I did not die. I'm amazed I just didn't have a heart attack and die during that period of my life because it was so miserable. It was so painful. The recovering from the relationship, the student loans hanging over my head, having to continue. I mean, I worked during that time. I don't know how I got through it. It was hard. I do not know how I survived that. Now, I share this with you today, and I didn't want to go into too much detail on this, but I share it with you because nowadays there's more reporting on this and more stories about this and everything about the dangers of taking on too much student debt. There wasn't that much talk about that in the 90s when I took out most of my loans, and that's the problem. I mean, I really advocate now, don't go to college and put yourself in debt, or your family in debt, unless you're getting a degree that is going to, return a lot of that investment. In other words, you're going to make enough when you graduate or after you've worked for 5 years. You're going to make enough that you're not only going to be able to pay your loans back, but also you're going to be able to, overcome that burden that you've had. So I would say that first. I love education. I'm a believer in education. I loved being a student. I love being a teacher. But I got to tell you, it's a broken system in our country right now. So that's the first thing I would say. Just be wary of, be cautious of. The other thing is don't gamble. Don't ever gamble. It's so easy to get hooked. You get hooked very easily, especially when you win your first jackpot. And I won many. And so that kept me hooked. It was kind of a curse to be somewhat lucky. It really was. And I wish I'd been the unluckiest person in the world, honestly. Never would have, drawn me in. So please don't gamble. And if you are gambling and you do gamble, get away from it. I was able to gradually detach. I didn't do it cold turkey, but I was able to gradually detach once I had more awareness and I had less need to go destroy myself mentally. It was not too hard to get away from it, but I know it's always going to be a risk for me. I'm sharing this as a cautionary tale for you today. Don't do what I did. Just don't do what I did ever. Oh, it's awful. It really destroyed, like I said, the two most painful things in my life were, my son, the situation with my son, and then the money situation I descended into. I can't believe I survived it. I can't believe I clawed my way out of it. I'm struggling now, but at least I know I'm not dealing, well, I'm still the update on the student loans actually is that I still have student loans hanging over my head and they will still accrue interest. And I'm hoping that I eventually will fall into one of those groups where they're trying to eliminate that debt for the elderly. Like I'm elderly at this point, but I don't know if that will ever happen. I have an income driven repayment plan that I recertify once a year. Obviously I don't have to pay anything because I live at poverty level. So I guess that's one of the only good things about being poor is that I don't, they're not coming after me. But do I feel bad about having that debt and leaving it out there? Sure. Sure. I took it out with the idea that it was going to be paid back. I didn't know this relationship would end. I didn't know that I wouldn't ever be earning enough to really repay it. I didn't know all that. So I don't like it sitting there, but I don't have, at my age now and the fact that I'm living on Social Security, I can't ever repay it. So, but it's still hanging over my head. It's ruined my credit for the rest of my life. And that's something I still have to deal with. Anyway, that is my sad, sad story. And it is pitiful. Doesn't give me a lot of joy to talk about it today, but I'm sharing it again with the hope that maybe just something I've said has, reached someone and maybe prevented somebody from doing something stupid, like taking out too many student loans and without a good way to repay them, and B, gambling until you fall into an abyss. So that's my warning. So on that somber note today, I would say until next time, be well. Be kind, keep moving forward, and take care. Bye.